England was a land haunted by fear. Behind the magnificent palaces of Queen Elizabeth I, beyond the triumphs celebrated by the English crown, another story unfolded in silence. A story whispered only behind locked doors, beneath candlelight, and within homes where every unexpected knock could mean death. In those years, faith itself had become a crime. To attend a Catholic Mass was considered an act of treason. To shelter a priest could cost a person everything: wealth, reputation, family, freedom, and life itself. Government informers were everywhere. Neighbors watched neighbors. Servants betrayed masters. Friends disappeared overnight. Even children sometimes reported their own parents in exchange for royal favor. It was into this world that Anne Line was born. Few could have imagined that the quiet young woman from a prosperous household would one day become one of the greatest heroines of England's underground Catholic resistance. Anne entered the world around 1563, during one of the most turbulent periods in English religious history. She was born into the Higham family, a respected and financially secure Puritan household in Essex. Her father, William Higham, was loyal to the Protestant establishment and expected every member of his family to remain faithful to the Church of England. Religion was not simply a matter of personal belief. It determined loyalty to the crown. To reject the state church was interpreted as rejecting the Queen herself. From childhood, Anne was raised in an environment of discipline, education, and obedience. She learned scripture, household responsibilities, and the expectations placed upon young women of noble families. Her future appeared perfectly arranged: an honorable marriage, social respectability, and a comfortable life among England's respectable elite. Yet beneath this orderly surface, questions slowly began to grow inside her. England was filled with stories of Catholics who continued practicing their faith in secret despite persecution. Hidden priests traveled disguised as merchants or servants. Secret masses were celebrated in remote houses before dawn. Entire families risked execution simply to receive the sacraments. For many, these people were traitors. For Anne, they became witnesses of extraordinary courage. No one knows the exact moment her heart changed. History preserves no diary revealing the conversations that transformed her convictions. Perhaps she met courageous Catholics through trusted acquaintances. Perhaps she encountered one of the missionary priests secretly entering England from seminaries established overseas, in places like Douai or Rome. Perhaps she simply witnessed the remarkable peace with which persecuted believers accepted suffering. Whatever happened, her decision became irreversible. Together with her brother William, Anne embraced the Catholic faith. It was not a youthful rebellion. It was a conscious choice that demanded the sacrifice of everything she had ever known. When their father discovered the conversion, his response was immediate. The family that had once provided security became a place of rejection. Anne and William were disowned. Their inheritance vanished. Their future disappeared. The comfortable home where Anne had spent her childhood was suddenly closed to her forever. There would be no reconciliation, no second chance, no emotional farewell. The law already viewed Catholics as enemies of England, and now her own family viewed her in much the same way. Almost overnight, Anne found herself standing in London's crowded streets with little more than her faith. For a young woman of noble upbringing, poverty was not merely uncomfortable, it was terrifying. She had never been prepared for such hardship. The city itself seemed merciless. The narrow streets overflowed with merchants, beggars, laborers, prisoners, and spies. Disease spread easily through overcrowded neighborhoods. Winter winds cut through thin clothing. Hunger was a constant companion for countless families. Yet amid this uncertainty, Anne discovered something that wealth had never given her. She found a new family. England's hidden Catholic community cared for one another with remarkable devotion. Those who had little shared what little they possessed. Homes opened their doors to strangers, united only by faith. Secret gatherings became places where hope survived despite overwhelming fear. It was within this hidden world that Anne met Roger Line. Roger was himself a convert to Catholicism. Like Anne, he had paid dearly for following his conscience. He understood the loneliness of rejection. He understood the cost of choosing conviction over comfort. Their relationship was born not from luxury or social ambition, but from shared sacrifice. Every conversation carried the awareness that tomorrow either of them might be arrested. Every meeting required caution. Every expression of faith demanded courage. When they eventually married around 1590, there were no grand public celebrations, no magnificent church bells, no royal recognition. Their marriage itself had to exist quietly within England's persecuted Catholic underground, yet those who knew them remembered a union strengthened by profound spiritual commitment. They were partners not only in marriage but in endurance. Together they prayed. Together they served fellow Catholics. Together they accepted that suffering had become part of daily life. But the peace they found would not last. Government officials continued searching relentlessly for recusants, those who refused to attend Anglican services. Heavy financial penalties ruined countless Catholic families. Repeated offences often led to imprisonment. The infamous prisons of Elizabethan England became crowded with men and women whose greatest crime was attending Mass. Roger was eventually arrested. Historical accounts indicate that he was imprisoned because of his Catholic faith, joining countless others swept into the machinery of religious persecution. The prison conditions were horrifying. Cells were overcrowded, disease spread rapidly, food was scarce. Prisoners often depended entirely upon family or friends to bring them meals, clothing, and medicine. Many died before ever receiving a formal sentence. Roger endured months of suffering. Authorities eventually ordered his banishment from England. Exile was presented as mercy, but for many Catholics it was simply another form of slow destruction. Forced to leave his homeland forever, Roger departed for the European continent, separated permanently from his wife. Anne watched her husband disappear without knowing she would never embrace him again. Far from home, weakened by imprisonment and years of hardship, Roger died in exile, probably around 1594. Anne became a widow while still a young woman. The grief itself would have broken many people, but sorrow was only the beginning. Around this same period, Anne developed a severe chronic illness. Contemporary sources describe her suffering from dropsy, now understood as edema, caused by serious underlying disease. Her body retained fluid painfully. Swelling affected her movement. She experienced recurring fevers, exhaustion, and increasing physical weakness. Simple tasks became difficult. Walking often required enormous effort. Some days, merely standing caused intense discomfort. Friends feared she would not survive. From every human perspective, Anne's future appeared finished. She possessed no fortune, no husband, no powerful family willing to protect her. Her health continued to deteriorate. England offered no sympathy to poor Catholic widows, yet something extraordinary began happening within her. The losses that should have filled her with bitterness instead deepened her compassion. She knew what it meant to lose home. She knew what it meant to lose family. She knew what it meant to lose the person she loved most. And because she had experienced such suffering, she began recognizing the hidden pain carried by others around her. Missionary priests entered England, knowing execution was a likely outcome. Catholic families lived under constant surveillance. Children grew up learning that silence could save lives. Every meal shared with a priest might become the evidence leading an entire household to the gallows. Anne understood all of it. She had become one of them completely. The frightened young woman who had once left her father's house with nothing now possessed something far greater than wealth. She possessed fearless conviction. Her illness weakened her body. Her losses stripped away earthly security. But neither grief nor sickness extinguished the quiet fire burning within her soul. Without realizing it, Anne Line was standing at the threshold of the mission that would define her place in history. A mission so dangerous that almost no one would have accepted it willingly, yet one that she would embrace with astonishing courage, despite knowing exactly what it could cost. Had you ever heard of Saint Anne Line before today? Have you or anyone you know ever received a blessing, a miracle, or the intercession of Saint Anne Line? Write it down in the comments below. I read every single one of your comments, and I'll leave a heart on yours. If this story warms your heart, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends and family so they can strengthen their faith too. The saints were forgotten once, and together we will never let that happen again. The Queen of the Catholic Underground, widowed, impoverished, and suffering from a debilitating illness that seemed to drain her strength a little more each day. Anne Line appeared to be the last person anyone would suspect of challenging the immense power of the English crown. Her body was fragile. Her future seemed uncertain. To those who passed her in the streets of London, she was simply another sickly widow trying to survive in a city where poverty consumed thousands every year. But appearances were often deceiving. Behind her quiet demeanor lived a woman whose courage would soon become legendary among England's persecuted Catholics. The death of Roger had not extinguished her faith. If anything, it had purified it. She had already surrendered her family, her inheritance, her husband, and her health. There was very little left that the government could threaten to take away. That freedom from earthly attachments became one of her greatest strengths. While others hesitated because they feared losing everything, Anne had already endured nearly every imaginable loss. Instead of retreating into obscurity, she made a decision that astonished even those within the secret Catholic community. She offered herself entirely to the mission. At the center of England's underground Catholic resistance stood the Jesuit missionaries. These priests crossed the English Channel in secret, often disguised as merchants, scholars, laborers, or servants. Many had studied at seminaries established abroad in places such as Douai, Rome, Valladolid, or Saint-Omer, before volunteering to return to England, fully aware that capture almost certainly meant execution. Yet they continued coming. Without priests, there could be no mass, no confessions, no sacraments, no pastoral care for the scattered Catholic faithful. Every priest who entered England needed something even more valuable than money. He needed a safe place to disappear. That responsibility would soon become Anne Line's calling. The Jesuit superior in England, Father Henry Garnet, recognized qualities in Anne that few others possessed. She was disciplined, she was discreet, she inspired trust. Most importantly, she never allowed fear to govern her decisions. Around the mid-1590s, Anne accepted one of the most dangerous assignments imaginable. She became the keeper of a safe house for Catholic priests in London. It sounded almost ordinary. In reality, it was an act punishable by death. From that moment forward, every knock on her door carried uncertainty. Every unfamiliar face could be an informer. Every conversation might be overheard. Every visitor had to be evaluated carefully before being allowed inside. Anne herself became known under an alias to conceal her true identity. Operating quietly among trusted Catholics, she managed a residence that functioned as far more than a home. It became a lifeline. Traveling priests arrived exhausted after weeks on horseback or on foot. Some had narrowly escaped government searches. Others carried secret correspondence between Catholic families. Many had spent months moving from one hiding place to another, never sleeping in the same location twice. Anne welcomed them all. Although her own health remained poor, she insisted on preparing meals whenever she was able. She arranged beds. She washed clothing. She organized supplies. She coordinated the arrival and departure of visitors with astonishing precision. Nothing happened by accident. Every movement followed carefully arranged plans designed to minimize suspicion. But the house itself held an even greater secret. Throughout Elizabethan England, wealthy Catholic families had begun constructing ingenious hiding places known today as priest holes. These were not simple closets. Master craftsmen such as Nicholas Owen, a humble Jesuit lay brother later canonized as a saint, designed extraordinary concealed chambers capable of deceiving even experienced government search teams. Anne understood their importance immediately. Behind ordinary walls lay narrow compartments just large enough for one person. Beneath wooden floors were concealed crawl spaces. False chimneys hid vertical passages. Staircases contained removable panels. Cabinets opened into empty cavities invisible to casual inspection. Some hiding places required complicated mechanisms to access them. Others could remain undiscovered despite hours of searching. The spaces were unimaginably cramped. A priest hiding inside often had no room to stand. There was almost no fresh air, no light, very little water. Sometimes they remained trapped inside for several days, while government officers repeatedly searched the building. Silence became a matter of survival. Even a single cough could reveal everything. Anne memorized every hidden entrance. She practiced opening and sealing them quickly. She learned exactly how long a person might safely remain inside before requiring food or water. Her responsibilities demanded constant attention to detail. One mistake could destroy the entire network. Government raids were becoming increasingly sophisticated. Queen Elizabeth's ministers had developed extensive intelligence operations. Professional pursuivants, government priest hunters, were trained specifically to detect hidden Catholics. They studied architecture, they questioned servants, they watched houses for unusual patterns. Some even pretended to seek shelter merely to inspect interiors. Rewards encouraged betrayal. Neighbors informed on neighbors. Financial incentives tempted desperate servants to reveal family secrets. Trust became one of the rarest commodities in England. Anne nevertheless continued expanding her work. Her home became a carefully organized center of quiet resistance. Messages arrived encoded. Visitors often traveled separately to avoid attracting attention. Masses were celebrated before sunrise or long after nightfall. Curtains remained tightly closed. Candles were shielded from windows. Every sound inside the house was carefully controlled. Those attending rarely stayed longer than necessary. Despite these precautions, moments of extraordinary beauty still emerged. Families who had not received Holy Communion for months wept quietly as priests celebrated the Eucharist. Children were secretly baptized. Marriages took place before small gatherings of trusted believers. The dying received the last rites. In an England where public Catholic worship had nearly disappeared, Anne's home became a sanctuary of hope. Her illness never disappeared. In fact, contemporary accounts suggest it gradually worsened. Dropsy caused painful swelling throughout her body. Recurring fevers left her exhausted. Simple movements required determination. Friends repeatedly urged her to rest. She answered that souls needed protection more urgently than her body needed comfort. Those who knew Anne often remarked upon the strange contrast between her physical weakness and her remarkable inner strength. Visitors expected to find a broken widow. Instead, they encountered calm confidence. She rarely complained. She listened carefully. She encouraged frightened Catholics whose courage had begun to fail. Some priests later remembered her as one of the quiet pillars sustaining England's hidden church. Yet the danger surrounding her continued growing. Each successful raid elsewhere in England produced new arrests. Under interrogation, prisoners sometimes revealed names. Sometimes they revealed locations. Sometimes they broke under torture. The authorities slowly assembled fragments of the underground Catholic network. Every arrest brought government agents one step closer to Anne's door. Still, she refused to abandon her mission. By early 1601, preparations were underway for the Feast of the Purification of the Blessed Virgin Mary, celebrated on February 2nd and also known as Candlemas. For persecuted Catholics, feast days carried profound emotional significance. Gathering together to celebrate the liturgy reminded them that, despite years of persecution, the Church still lived. Anne knew the risks. A larger gathering meant greater visibility. More visitors increased the possibility of betrayal. Nevertheless, arrangements quietly proceeded. Trusted Catholics received discreet invitations. The priests scheduled to celebrate Mass arrived without attracting attention. Everything appeared carefully planned. Then, almost unbelievably, the government learned of the meeting. Historians have never established with certainty how the information reached the authorities. Perhaps an informer had infiltrated the network. Perhaps someone had been followed through London's streets. Perhaps surveillance had continued for weeks without anyone realizing it. The exact answer disappeared into history. What remains certain is that government officers chose their moment with chilling precision. Just as preparations for the sacred liturgy were beginning, armed pursuivants surrounded Anne's residence. Inside the house, seconds suddenly became priceless. The priest had almost no time to react. Panic threatened to overwhelm everyone present. But Anne, weakened by illness yet astonishingly composed, immediately understood that if even a few precious moments could be gained, lives might still be saved. She stepped toward the entrance, knowing that every heartbeat she delayed the officers could mean the difference between survival and capture. For those hidden within the walls, she had spent years protecting. The chair of death and the farewell kiss. The pounding on the door echoed through the house like the tolling of a funeral bell. For years, Anne had lived with the certainty that this moment would eventually come. Every hidden mass, every priest she sheltered, every whispered prayer, every secret meeting had brought her closer to this day. The officers of the crown burst into the house with practiced precision. They had conducted countless raids before, and they knew exactly what they were looking for. Drawers were emptied onto the floor, furniture was overturned. Walls were struck with heavy tools as they searched for concealed chambers. Every corner of the house became the object of suspicion. Anne remained remarkably calm. Although weakened by chronic illness, she positioned herself between the authorities and the heart of the house, delaying them just long enough for the missionary priest to reach one of the carefully concealed hiding places. Every second mattered. The hiding spaces built into Catholic homes were engineering marvels, but they depended upon one crucial advantage: time. If the priest could disappear before the search reached its most intense phase, there was hope. Anne answered questions slowly. She refused to panic. She forced the officers to focus their attention on her, instead of immediately discovering what lay behind the walls. Eventually, despite her efforts, the search revealed enough evidence to convince the authorities that the house had been serving England's underground Catholic network. Anne was arrested. She offered no resistance. Neighbours quietly watched from windows as soldiers escorted the frail widow away through London's narrow streets. Some recognized her. Others had no idea that the quiet woman being taken into custody had spent years protecting men whose only crime was celebrating the sacraments according to the ancient traditions of their faith. She was brought to prison. The cells of Elizabethan England were notorious for disease, cold, overcrowding, and despair. For someone already suffering from severe dropsy and recurring fevers, imprisonment was almost a death sentence, even before any trial could begin. Yet witnesses later recalled that Anne's composure never abandoned her. She prayed, she encouraged fellow prisoners, she accepted her suffering with remarkable serenity. Interrogators wanted names, they wanted addresses, they wanted the identities of priests, benefactors, and Catholic families. Every piece of information could dismantle years of underground work. Anne remained silent. The government already possessed enough evidence to prosecute her for harboring a Catholic priest, an offense classified under English law as high treason. There was little hope of acquittal. The courtroom itself reflected the unequal balance of power. The judges represented the authority of the crown. The prosecutors framed the case not merely as a religious offense, but as a threat against the stability of England. To shelter a priest, they argued, was to aid enemies of the kingdom. Anne understood the outcome long before the verdict was announced. When questioned, she did not deny being a Catholic. She did not apologize for helping priests. According to historical accounts preserved by Catholic chroniclers, she openly acknowledged that she had acted according to her conscience and her faith. The sentence was inevitable: death. For the authorities, the execution was intended to serve as a warning. If ordinary citizens witnessed the fate awaiting anyone who sheltered Catholic clergy, perhaps others would abandon the underground movement. But history often transforms intended warnings into lasting testimonies. During the weeks before her execution, Anne's physical condition deteriorated dramatically. The swelling caused by her illness had become so severe that walking even short distances required enormous effort. Persistent fever left her exhausted. Friends who managed to communicate with her feared that she might die in prison before the execution could even take place. On the morning of February 27, 1601, London awoke to another public execution at Tyburn. Public executions in Elizabethan England attracted large crowds. Some came seeking entertainment, others attended out of curiosity. Many came because public punishment was considered an important demonstration of royal justice. Among those gathered that morning were Catholics praying quietly within the crowd, fully aware that one of their own would soon give her life. Anne could barely stand. Her illness had progressed to the point that the officials responsible for transporting prisoners faced an unusual problem. Unable to make the journey on foot, she was carried toward the place of execution in a wooden chair. The image left a deep impression on those who witnessed it. Here was no military commander, no armed rebel, no powerful political conspirator. Instead, a gravely ill widow, physically broken but spiritually resolute, was being taken to her death because she had opened the doors of her home to men whose ministry had been outlawed. Even some among the spectators reportedly found the contrast difficult to ignore. Her weakness only highlighted the extraordinary determination that had sustained her for so many years. As the procession approached Tyburn, Anne observed the solemn scene awaiting her. Earlier that day, 2 Catholic priests, Father Mark Barkworth and Father Roger Philcock, had also faced execution because of their priestly ministry. Their deaths reflected the relentless persecution that had spread across England during Elizabeth's reign. Anne regarded them not as defeated men, but as fellow witnesses who had remained faithful until the end. Before her own execution, she expressed profound reverence for their sacrifice. According to long-standing Catholic tradition, she approached Father Mark Barkworth and kissed his feet as a final sign of honor and fellowship in faith. For those present, the gesture spoke more loudly than any speech. It was not an act of despair. It was an expression of gratitude. It declared that those condemned by the state could still be honored in the eyes of those who shared their beliefs. The officials quickly moved to complete the execution. Anne was offered one final opportunity to distance herself from Catholicism. Acceptance of the established church could have changed everything. It would have spared her life. She refused, not defiantly, not with anger, but with quiet certainty. When asked why she had sheltered priests, Anne answered with remarkable simplicity. She explained that she wished only she had been able to do even more for them. That statement would become one of the defining memories associated with her martyrdom. Witnesses remembered not a woman consumed by hatred toward her persecutors, but one whose final public words reflected unwavering devotion to her faith. Moments later, her earthly life came to an end. She was only about 37 years old. The authorities expected that her death would extinguish her influence. Instead, stories about her courage spread rapidly among England's hidden Catholic communities. Missionary priests continued entering the country. Secret masses continued to be celebrated. Safe houses continued operating despite enormous danger. The memory of the frail widow who had risked everything for strangers became a source of strength for countless believers living under persecution. Years passed. Kings and queens succeeded one another. Political climates changed. Yet Anne Lyne's name endured. The woman once condemned as a traitor gradually came to be remembered as a martyr, whose greatest weapon had never been violence, wealth, or political power. It had been unwavering charity. In 1929, she was beatified by Pope Pius V, alongside other English martyrs. And in 1970, Pope Paul VI canonized her among the 40 martyrs of England and Wales. The same woman who had once been escorted through London streets as a convicted criminal was now publicly honored by the Catholic Church as a saint whose life testified to steadfast faith, sacrificial love, and extraordinary courage in one of England's darkest chapters of religious persecution.